How much money did I make playing in bars to 5 people versus when I played at Coachella to 100,000? How much money did I make teaching private students versus when I taught at universities? How much did I make when I played on a recording that got over 1 billion streams and went gold in the US? How much money do I make from YouTube? From you watching this video right now. I've been a professional musician for 15 years. I've done all kinds of things in the music industry. And in this video, I'm going to tell you how much I got paid for basically everything I've ever done. This is going to be like the history of my career through the lens of personal finance, and how my thinking about money has evolved along the way. I'm going to tell you about things I quit, things I got fired from, things that were awesome, and it's all going to be kind of vulnerable, so I don't know, don't make fun of me. I don't know, whatever. You're going to do what you're going to do, so whatever.
I'll start from the beginning.
I think my first experience of attempting to turn my love of music into an income started at 16 when I worked at a local music shop. I vacuumed the store, cleaned the bathrooms, rung up customers, etc. I got like $8 an hour, and I only ended up working there for like, I think less than a month. I actually got fired when I forgot to show up for a shift one day. There was a couple years in between that and my next real job in music, and in that time I did all kinds of bullshit. I worked as a cashier at BJ's, which I quit after 2 weeks. I did data entry for a pharmaceutical company, which I got fired from. I did street canvassing in Philadelphia, which actually I became a supervisor doing that. And I delivered pizza. And all these things paid like shit, but hey, I was a teenager just learning the ropes of the working world. Anyway, flash forward to like 2009, and my time as a student at the School of Rock segued into my time as a teacher at the School of Rock. I think I was getting like $15 a lesson, which for a 19-year-old in my first teaching gig, I guess was fine, but today I think it was kind of awful. And it wasn't too long before I left to start teaching privately, which marks what feels like the actual beginning of my professional music career.
Let the real war begin.
In my early and mid-20s, my main source of income was teaching private lessons. My rate was $45 an hour, I had like 10 to 15 weekly students, and I drive all around to their houses. Factoring in cancellations and like summer vacation and stuff like that, I think I was making like $20K a year from this. At the same time, I was doing various gigs in the Philly music scene. I'd get like $50 to $200 or so per gig, and I'd have a handful of these per month for a total of like $500 a month in random gigs. In this era, I also started doing regular church gigs, which is a common source of a regular check in the music world. I worked for many, many, many small churches. I think when I started, I was getting like $50 a service, and it varied a lot, but at a certain point, I had a $120 a week church gig for several years. I also, for a while, had a gig playing piano in ballet classes at a local university for $100 a day, 2 days a week. So in this first era, I was clearing like $30 to $35K a year. Teaching was the bulk of it, and random gigs of various kinds supplemented the rest. I think this era was characterized by a sense of like, wow, I'm actually doing it. I'm surviving, and I'm doing only music. And that brings us to era 2 of my professional music career.
It's time to get serious.
In era 2, I'm getting into my later 20s. I had a decent sense of the professional landscape, I'm decently connected in the local scene, and my standards got a little bit higher. I became less willing to do anything for any amount of money. That ballet gig I had for $200 a week? Well, it was an hour away from my house, it started at 8 a.m., so I was waking up at like 6:30 a.m. to get there on time, and often after having had a late gig the night before. So it didn't really fit into my life, and I ended up passing that gig off to a student. I cranked my teaching rate up to $60 an hour, and I stopped taking the lowest paying gigs. Also, just by virtue of being more experienced and connected in the scene, the average amount that I was making per gig went up. I would do wedding gigs for like $350 to $500, and sometimes even as much as $1,000. I quit the $120 a week church gig that I had had for years, and picked up a $220 a week church gig, but that gig didn't last for long. As a keyboard player, as you get into the more serious gigs in the church world, it becomes more important to have like a legitimate gospel feel and vocabulary in your playing, and I never really had that, so I ended up getting replaced by somebody who did. And that was kind of a shame, because if you're really good at the church thing, you can actually make a lot of money doing it, but it's okay. It was never really my thing musically or spiritually, and so I let my church career come to an end. But my teaching career advanced a bit when I started teaching at 2 local universities. Now, this was appealing at the time because it felt like maybe it would actually be a road to something with my teaching, like maybe I'd end up in a stable salaried position at a college, which, at the very least, would be a way to maybe be seen as finally valid in the eyes of society. But when you start teaching at the college level, generally you start as a low-level adjunct professor making like $3K per semester per class, which is pretty bad considering how much effort it is to put together a class. Now, I've actually heard that teaching at the higher level places like Berkeley can be a pretty good gig, but overall, my impression of being an adjunct professor at local colleges is not great. So this second era is characterized by doing all the same things but at a higher level, charging more for teaching, getting higher paying gigs, and not saying yes to everything. I was making like 40, 50K a year, and that was starting to feel like a legitimate income, but also in some ways it kind of felt like I was just surviving. But by this point, I was starting to hone in on some of the subtler and more personal things about how I wanted to engage with the economy. Things like, for example, how does it feel working for others versus working for myself and being entrepreneurial? Things like that, nobody can really teach you. You just kind of have to get out there and try a million things and see how things feel. So that brings us to Era 3, which contains some huge unexpected plot twists. So now I'm into my 30s, and I'm making like 50K a year doing the typical musician hustle. Now, 50K a year is a perfectly respectable, decent living for somebody who doesn't have a family and isn't living in an expensive city. But as I got further into real adulthood, I started to feel kind of not that great about hustling my ass off just to make the bare minimum. I wanted to make more money, and I was tired of cobbling together a living from a bunch of random sources, none of which felt like they were really a road to anything. And I wanted to do real adult things with money, like maybe buy a house someday or save for retirement. But I just didn't see any clear route to that 50K becoming like 80K without doing things that I knew that I didn't want to do. Like, I knew that I didn't want to join a high-level wedding band that was working full-time or take on like 40 private students. So for a while, I was actually toying with quitting. At least mostly. Like, I would always do music in some capacity, but I thought that maybe if I got like a tech job or something like that, it would take the burden off of music to support me exclusively. And I may have done that if I hadn't gotten the random call that led to my current touring career. First with Miss Lauryn Hill, and then later with other artists like the Fugees, Sofia Valdez, and several of Bob Marley's grandchildren. If you're curious about the full in-depth story of how all that happened, check out my video, How I Got My First Big Touring Gig. And so that brings us to Era 3, which is what we're in right now.
Things about to get crazy!
When you play as a sideman for another artist, generally you get a day rate, or a day rate and a show rate. It varies depending on the artist, but generally I get $750 for a show, and $350 to $400 for rehearsal, and $350 to $400 for a travel day. So, for example, when I played Coachella, I got $400 the day before the show when I flew out, $750 the day of the show, and then $400 the next day to fly home. And that was in addition to $400 a day for a few days of rehearsals beforehand. My first year of doing this, I made around $40K from the touring, rehearsing for the touring, and recording with those artists. And it felt great to make that amount from just one thing, although for the insane amount of hours that it took, part of me didn't feel that great about it financially, although I definitely felt great about it as like a thing that I had gotten to do. I didn't have nearly as much time for other stuff that year, but I did still teach and do other gigs, which brought in another like 15 to 20K for a total of 60K that year. And it felt like things were finally starting to look up. In my second year of doing this, one of the artists that I play for had a massive international hit. That's Praise Jah in the Moonlight by YG Marley. It went gold in the US, platinum in Canada, and got 1 billion streams worldwide. And for that, I got nothing. Well, not nothing. I got my day rate for the day that I recorded on the song, but I didn't get any royalties or anything like that. And that's fine because I didn't write the song, and that's how that works. However, that year I did a lot more touring generally, and I was even on an actual tour, meaning a months-long stretch of back-to-back shows where you live on a bus and you don't go home in between. And that was financially great because I was getting paid every day for the length of the tour, and more of those days were my higher show rate rather than my lower day rate. So in that second year, I made $65K from all the touring, and then another $20K on top of that from all the usual other sources, for a total of $85K that year, the most I had ever made in a year. In one sense, that was great because it finally felt like an adult income. But I was a little conflicted because I knew that in order to keep that income going, I'd have to keep touring. And to put it bluntly, touring kind of sucks. I'm not going to go off on that whole tangent right now, but I'll give you all the dirt in this video.
It's worse than you think.
So this video has been kind of vulnerable, which on one hand is weird. I don't know why money has to be such this like sensitive and private topic. I guess in our society there's this sense that the amount of economic value that we generate is like akin to our intrinsic value as human beings, which of course is bullshit because some of the most valuable things we do as people have nothing to do with money. But yeah, it's kind of awkward talking about this. Like, there's still this part of me that has internalized societal messaging that maybe I should just grow up and get a real job. And so I'm afraid that people who have real jobs will see this and will look down on me. Or even that other musicians who make more than me will see this and look down on me. And simultaneously, I'm afraid that musicians who make less than me will see this and think that I'm making this as some kind of flex, which I'm really not. Like, I know that I'm not the best player out there, and I also know that I'm at where I'm at largely because of luck. Anyway, I'm making this video because I wish that somebody had made it for me. Because I want all the people out there who are trying to make decisions about how to live their life to know that if you pursue a life in music, this is what it is. Well, to be clear, there's a lot of variability in what it is, but this is what it is for me, so far. And I think that'll be a useful insight for some people. To be a professional musician, you have to have a really high tolerance for financial instability. I have no idea when the next time I'm going to get paid is. And I may have made what felt to me like a lot of money last year, but I can't live like somebody who makes that amount of money per year because there's no guarantee that it's not going to be half as much next year. And it probably will be half that next year, because I do not want to tour as much as I did last year. Also, this might seem like an overplayed sentiment, but in order to be a professional musician, you really just have to love it, and be doing it primarily because you love it. Because even at the higher levels, it's just not a lot of pay for a lot of work. I mean, the electrician who came to my house last week probably makes way more than me, but in a way that's more reliable and stable. Touring feels like good money while it's happening, but it's not happening most of the time. And if it was happening most of the time, I'd probably go insane. So the next frontier for me is not necessarily more money. I mean, that would be cool, but what would be a lot cooler is if I could just make a decent living, but in a way that is reliable and stable and doesn't require me to be away from home for months at a time.
Absolutely predictable.
So there's one piece of my income that I have not yet told you about, and that is YouTube. I'm making money right now from you watching this video. Well, to be specific, from you watching the ad that played in the beginning of this video. I actually just got my first ever payout from YouTube the other day, which totaled about $120 for 7 months of earnings, which is basically nothing, but it still felt meaningful because of all the things that I do, the content, this content, is what feels like it's the most me. And that brings us to Era 4.
The future!
Era 4 has not happened yet, but I'm hopefully transitioning there. Out of all the things that I do, I think the content thing is what I enjoy most and is what I'm best at. So I'm trying to transition into this being some kind of viable thing, some kind of real source of income. So I'm launching a Patreon and a website, which will serve as a hub for all the things that I do online. If you sign up for my Patreon, you'll get all the digital products on my website included in the membership. That's my Music Theory 101 course, my How to Program Drums in Logic Pro course, all my future courses, and a bunch of synth sounds available for download. There will also be exclusive live streams and a bunch of other stuff too. But if you don't want any of that stuff and you just like what I do and you want to support me, there's a membership tier for that too. Now, in the short term, I know that this isn't going to bring in much money because I don't have a big audience. But the more that I listen to larger creators talk about how they make money online, the more it becomes clear to me that having a direct relationship with your supporters is the way to go. Because YouTube ad revenue is criminally low, and nobody wants to hear me read ads for NordVPN in the middle of a video. So that's what I hope is next for me. Putting more time into the things that are really me, and hoping that it works out. Anyway, I hope that you found this window into the professional musician journey useful, and please consider becoming a member of my Patreon so that I can do more of what I think I do best, which is this.